You know the story of Pandora's box? Yeah? It's a Greek myth. I don't know if they had Greek mythers, but they had Greek myths about the creation of the world, and it was an explanation for why bad things happen. And when Zeus was creating the world, Zeus put all the bad stuff into a box. And at the very bottom of the box, just in case, the story goes, he put in hope. And his daughter, who was very curious, and female, so we can blame it on her, came along, opened the box, all the bad stuff flies out, so we have stomach aches and wars and whatnot. But what also came out was hope. So that's one version of hope. I've been thinking a lot about hope lately. I've written a book about prayer. And if you write a book about prayer and the people in charge of this stuff arrange interviews with the media, they're allowed to ask me anything they want, but I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that they ask me about prayer. And one of the questions that I'm always asked, is, does prayer work? Sometimes this happens on television. I prefer radio interviews because you don't have to wear makeup, and you can load the dishwasher while you're chatting with Dr. Oz. Well, it'll tell you something about my level of cultural awareness that I had never heard of Dr. Oz before his interview. So I hope he's not from Tulsa. But most of the radio personalities who call, thank God, are local celebrities. So I don't know anything about them. So my introduction to Frank Harris from WMAD, Madison, Wisconsin, or Joel and Susan bringing you Jesus in the morning. Sometimes they're preceded by advertisements for acupuncture or for organizations devoted to the sanctity of marriage. And further clues might be offered by the music, but by the time I'm listening to Drop Kick Me Jesus Through the Goalposts of Life, or a chorus of wails, it's really too late for me to adjust my message, even if I wanted to. So they asked me, does prayer work? Sometimes the question is asked with happy confidence, sometimes with irony bordering on sarcasm, but always, it seems, with the expectation that my answer will offer something in the way of Christian hope. I have to answer them honestly. No. And yes. Christian hope is distinct from the hope that was waiting at the bottom of Pandora's box. The mechanics of the thing are kind of the same. Hope is the eager expectation that things will turn out okay after all. And since we live in a Christian culture, it's difficult to divest ourselves of the idea that hope is a good thing, which is why we tell Pandora's story to children. But the Greeks had a very different conception of their gods. Zeus was just as omnipotent as Jehovah, but he wasn't particularly good. So he didn't put hope in the bottom of the box as an antidote to the evil his daughter was sure to let loose in the world. He knew her well enough to know that. Instead, he put it in there as a way to amplify it. Hope is what keeps us in the game, even though we're bound to lose. Hope keeps us attached to the world in spite of its torments. Hope is the illusion that things are or will soon be better than they are. My grandson, Andrew Michael Griffith, was born on October 22nd, 2010, about 10 days before his due date. His pregnancy had gone really well, and there was every expectation, we didn't even have to call it hope then, that his would be an uncomplicated birth with what we are now so privileged to think of as a normal, that is, a healthy outcome. Instead, baby Drew was subjected to what is known as a catastrophic cord accident. His umbilical cord was compressed during labor, and as he was emerging into the world, it actually broke. Drew lost half his blood volume, and his oxygen supply was cut off for what we now know was too long. But these days, still, a good life can be salvaged even from so calamitous a beginning as this. So my grandson was whisked off to the neonatal intensive care unit where his small life would be sustained by various instruments and tubes for the next 5 days. If hope is a thing with feathers, it is not a soaring raptor, but a fallen sparrow. One that accidentally hurled itself against what it thought was clear air. Bewildered, ignorant, it staggers beneath the treachery of clear glass. It tries to sing with its broken voice, and it tries to fly with broken wings. There is heroism in hope, but mostly there is pathos. Please, the hopeful sparrow peeps and prays. For you, all things are possible, so please. If the bird is lucky, its injuries allow it to get airborne before some predator, a hawk maybe, comes along and counts it as the answer to its own prayer. Hope springs eternal in the human breast, Alexander Pope declared, and in the conclusion we don't quote as often, man never is, but is always to be blessed. Christian hope is defined as our Christian anticipation of a future in which God's promises are fulfilled according to God's covenant faithfulness and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, all of which is prefigured by the work of the Holy Spirit through the church and presumably through churchgoers. So if the daughter of a Roman official or a widow's son or even Lazarus, the FOJ, the friend of Jesus, if these are resurrected as a sign of what is to come, why not your daughter? Why not your son, your father, your friend? Why not my grandson? Yo, God, I prayed. A little miracle here in the University of California Neonatal Intensive Care Unit would do a hell of a lot for your reputation. Especially among the skeptical, rational materialists of the 21st century USA, I will publicize it. Not my will, but yours be done, of course, but Jesus, I'm just saying, please. I was having lunch at an Olive Garden one day with a clergy colleague, and as she was distributing the salad onto our respective plates, she asked me what theological questions I am most apt to see in my work as a law enforcement chaplain. Well, I said, there's the theodicy problem, of course. You know, how can a good and loving God allow evil and suffering? And just as if I'd pressed a button, my colleague lit up, opened up, and gave forth the answer. Human agency, choice-making, free will is meaningless without human freedom, blah, blah, blah. If you've taken systematic theology, you know the drill. And when whatever disaster confronts us too clearly lacks a connection to any human choice or agency, we fall back on the mystery, on Christian hope, the promise that even if our human lives are presently unbearable, everything will be fine. Every tear will be dried, every frown will be turned upside down when the last days come. I can't be too hard on my colleague. I have buttons that can be pushed. And the files in my clever head pop open, and there are all the answers I am far too quick to offer to questions that haven't actually been asked. But I wasn't a minister at the neonatal intensive care unit in San Diego. I was a grandmother, and the mother of a son and daughter-in-law whose hearts were courageous and breaking. But there was a chaplain, and he came to visit. God bless him. It must be difficult to understand how God could let something like this happen to your little baby, he said sympathetically. God's ways can be hard to understand at times like these. He was a good guy. He was sincerely eager to offer solace and to be of help. And my son and daughter listened politely to him, and I blew my nose, and I said hello with a lot of sympathy. I know what it's like to show up in the tunnel when the light at the end is fading to black. Still, it struck me even then that I'm grateful to have a theology that is not based in hope. I'm glad I don't have to apologize for my God. Does prayer work? The radio announcer asks, hopefully. And I answer honestly, no. I mean, it depends on what you're expecting prayer to do. I mean, I know what we want prayer to do. I know what I want prayer to do. I wanted there to be a Santa God sitting on a cloud in that great celestial department store in the sky, who, if his child asks for bread, will give her a stone. If we had what we prayed for, life would be all bread, all the time. Is it only me who notices the stones? Why do we cling to a notion of God that is so useless in the face of something as ubiquitous as death, as common as pain? Why would we worship a God who won't comfort us when there is no hope? Okay, my particular ministry is all death all the time. But surely theologians, being human, have smacked up against those occasions in which there is no hope. Have they never truly listened to the cries of the bereaved? Their God, as they describe him, offers no solace, no comfort, no explanation, only the cruel demand that we go on hoping for a miracle. And when we get the stone instead, for some unseen, intangible abstraction, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Whosoever believeth in me. This sounded to me like an IOU scribbled in invisible ink on foolscap. And this was supposed to take the place of the warm and necessary one I would never see again. It doesn't work. That good news, it might be good news. It might work. It might even be true somehow. But in the NICU or by the side of the lake or next to the highway, it doesn't work. Jesus found this out. In the face of loss, even Jesus had to shut his mouth and stand there weeping with Mary in the dust and the sorrow he found on his way to Bethany. My husband, Simon, tells me that the highest praise he ever hears me utter of something is that it is useful. Does prayer work? The radio interviewer asks, and I know what he's asking. Well, if my prayers had worked, my grandson would be 2 months old by now. But my grandson died. Prayer doesn't work, I tell the radio announcers. But prayer is useful. We want prayer to alter reality, and prayer won't do that. What prayer can do is open our eyes to reality. Prayer can help us to see what is actually happening all around us. Prayers let us see God in what is, and prayers reveal that God is love. If my prayers can't do that for me, can't let me see reality and know that God is love, then frankly, prayer wouldn't be worth doing, let alone writing about. God is love. God is love. So where was God in the story of this short, hopeless life and inevitable death of one of God's fallen sparrows, a little baby boy in San Diego? God was everywhere. God was all around him and beyond him, God was the tenderness in the hands of the doctor who removed the respirator from Drew's little mouth. God was the tears in the eyes of the nurse as he adjusted the anesthetic. God was the woman who gave me a Kleenex and put her arms around me when I fell apart. Turned out she was the neonatologist who'd been present at his birth. And God? Oh, God, your miraculous love was my daughter-in-law's strength as she sang to the son that lay in her arms. And God was the song he heard as he died. I wanted him to have life. It would have been such a good life in a good world. It was a good life, Mom, my son says. A good life in a good world, a life filled end to end, womb to tomb with love. Does prayer work? No. And oh, yes. Day by day, dear Lord, three things I pray. To see thee more clearly, to love thee more dearly, and to follow thee more nearly, day by day. Amen.